Okay, I think it's time. I have 2:05 at least on my watch. If someone wants to tell me it's a little fast or a little slow, let me know. But my watch has 2:05. Now I hope you don't mind the fact that I'm standing down here and not up there. It's just the way I like to do it. Anybody who knows me as a trainer knows I like to pace a lot. And I like to talk to you and point at you, and I can't do that from a podium. It's just not as fun or as easy to do that. So I'm down here. I hope that's okay. My name is Bruce Honer. I am a training officer out of Region 9. That's the regional office in San Francisco. Basically cover the West Coast and the Pacific Islands. And I'm here to talk to you about administering disbursements, session number 5. Okay, now this is something, I don't want to say a lengthy session, but there's quite a few slides that I'm going to go through here. This is being recorded, so be aware of that. We're watching you. But because it's being recorded, I would like to, if that's okay with you, to save the questions till the end. Because sometimes I get a lot of questions because I say some thought-provoking things while I'm up here, and I get a lot of questions, and I never get to the end as a result of that. So if you'll please save those questions till the end so that at least those folks from home who couldn't come here to Atlanta could watch the entire thing first, that would be beautiful. Thank you. All right, that said, let's give you an agenda. Let's talk about what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to first give you an overview of disbursements, give you the big picture, hopefully. Then I'm going to break into different types of disbursements, the early disbursements, the late disbursements, yes, those fun post-withdrawal disbursements, the retroactive disbursements, and then I'll talk about credit balances, because those are disbursements. And then what about disbursements when regaining eligibility? What do I do then, Bruce? I'll talk about that. And then what about those times when I have to actually return funds? I've disbursed money, but sometimes I have to return it back to the department. How do I do that, Bruce? Well, I'm going to tell you. So let's start off with a disbursement overview. All right. A couple of things, right? Let's start off talking about getting the money. To get the money, you use what we call our G5 system, basically the department's payment system, where you have direct access to the U.S. Treasury. That's right. And when you draw down those funds, just keep in mind that it is not specific to the student. You're drawing it down based on the program type, whether it be Pell or direct loan, for instance. You would specifically choose the program type and in accordance with whatever award year for what you're drawing it down. So it's not student specific. Basically what's happening there is, let's say you have 10 students. The total sum of, let's say, Pell Grant funds that you're going to be drawing down for those 10 students, let's say, is $20,000. You're just going to draw down, you're going to go into the G5 system, draw down $20,000 for the 18-19 award year. Okay, that's what you're going to do initially, all right? Then what you're going to do is this second part here is you then have to report, you have to substantiate that drawdown by reporting to us what that drawdown was used for. In other words, I'm going to draw down $20,000 and I'm going to report who I've disbursed that $20,000 to the COD system. Now, basically the general rule is for Title IV aid is that I have to report the actual disbursements to the COD, and I can do it as early as 7 days prior to the actual disbursement occurring, okay? But no later than 15 days after the disbursement has occurred. Now that becomes fascinating because of some things that occur as a result as to how you're able to draw down those funds. For instance, let's take a look at the Federal Pell Grant Fund. Now this is what we call a records first program. And what that means is that when you go ahead and use your financial aid system, you build that origination record and you report, or you build that record, excuse me, and then you eventually report that actual disbursement to COD. What happens is COD will take that report and it'll then communicate with the G5 system, and only then that amount that you have reported gets populated or actually generates, and not until then does it generate in the G5 system. So in other words, that money, that $20,000 that you wanted to draw down is not going to be accessible if you have not already reported it. But hold on, you said, Bruce, no later than 15 days after you reported the actual disbursement. How am I going to report it after the fact that I have dispersed it if I haven't even gotten the money to disperse it to the student yet? Well, I've got two different types of schools that are going on here. If I'm a school that relies on the Title IV-A drawdown funds to hit my federal funds account and then disperse it to the student, I have to, in order for me to be able to draw that down, report that sometime within 7 days prior to. But if I'm one of those schools that likes to use my own school funds, knowing that I'm going to get reimbursed for that Pell Grant funds a little bit later on, then what I can do is I can make that disbursement using my own school funds, and then within 15 days after the disbursement is made, go ahead and then request that drawdown of funds, build the record, and then draw down the funds to reimburse myself. Does that make sense? So that's how that would work with Pell. Now, direct loans are a little bit different. Direct loans, what I'm doing is I'm reporting that actual disbursement as early as 7 days prior to, and then, or as late as 15 days. Now, it's not a records first program, so honestly, the funds are actually sitting there waiting for you. Okay, basically, we start off that current funding level in G5 with approximately 1/2 of what you had dispersed the prior year. So you have this big pot of gold just waiting for you to disperse. And you can go ahead and report that actual disbursement as late as only 15 days, though. So stay on top of it, okay? And that reporting actually substantiates, just like it also did with the Pell, it substantiates, the reason as to why you drew down the money in the first place. Well, it's for this student, for this much, and so on and so forth, okay? So it's not one of those things where you get to go ahead and draw down as much as you want, okay? So here's the big picture. Here's the big picture as pertains to disbursements. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to do that G5 drawdown request, kind of like what I just talked to you about. I'll go into just a little bit more detail in just a second. And then once you draw it down, it's going to hit your federal funds account, that account that you have designated to receive those funds for a drawdown. And then within 3 business days after it hits your funds account, federal funds account, you have to disperse those funds against the student's account at your school. Now, that is for any type of disbursement that you're going to make. That means it's the same process you're going to do for an early disbursement or just a regular disbursement during the term or a late disbursement, post-withdrawal disbursement, or a retroactive. That is the process, okay, that you're going to go through. Now, once you disperse it against the student's account, what you're going to do is you're going to take your share and pay for the institutional cost first, okay? After you take your institutional costs, there's going to be maybe or maybe not. You might have some more Title IV aid than what the student owed you, and you go ahead and you say, well, I got some excess here. What do I do with that? Well, doggone it, you give it to the student or the parent, okay? Now, primarily the student if it's a regular Title IV-A, but if it's a PLUS loan, give it to the parent if that's the one who wants to receive it. But you've only got 14 days from the time you apply that disbursement against the student's account in order for you to get that money to them, that excess amount. That's what we call a credit balance. Now, I want you to notice that this is just a high overview, and I've just done the entire session, and so we're ready to go home now, right? Well, no, I'm going to go into all of these sections in greater detail. I just went through our agenda, didn't I? But I just wanted you to see the big picture first, okay? So again, talking about those requesting funds now, all the way back to that top box in the left-hand corner, I want you to remember here that I said the schools must not request funds that exceed, notice the term we're using here called immediate need. Now, immediate need means that, hey, I'm not going to go into the G5 system because I heard, wow, this is the U.S. Treasury, and I don't even think they know how much money is in there. I can just draw down as much as I can, can't I? I mean, after all, it's plenty of money. Nobody will notice, right? Well, of course we will. All right. Now, what we're saying is you're only going to draw down as much as you need within the next 3 days to disperse against the student's account. That's what that is. So you're going to draw down that money, right? And again, as I indicated earlier, I want to be a little more specific now. Once I draw down that money and it hits my federal funds account, I'm going to count 3 business days and before I have to have that dispersed against those specific students' accounts. So let's say I request those funds on a Monday. It hits my federal funds account on a Tuesday. Now, I have 3 business days. What does that mean? Well, on Tuesday in my federal funds account, close of business Wednesday is day 1. Close of business Thursday is day 2. Guess what? It better be applied against the student's account by close of business Friday, or you're out of compliance, and what you have is called excess cash. Now, I'm not here to talk about the fines and penalties when you have excess cash and what the thresholds are and so on and so forth. This is all about disbursements, but just know this, we don't like excess cash, okay? It is just wise for you to make sure that by the end of those 3 days you have it applied against those students' account, okay? Good. Now, what is a disbursement? Now that we've got the money and we're ready to make the disbursement is, and I'd like to read this if you don't mind, is defined as the date the school credits a student's account at the school or pays a student or parent directly with. Now, here's the distinction. Funds received from the department. So I drew down that money. I'm using that money to apply it against the student's account. I just made a disbursement when I did that. Well, hold on, maybe I'm one of those schools and I have all kinds of money. I don't want to worry about that 7-day window that I have to draw it down and make sure I have it against the student's account. Let's just go ahead and use my own school's money that I'm going to go ahead and I am going to disperse the funds against the school's money against the student's account, knowing that I'm going to reimburse myself maybe next week sometime, okay? But that's when I am going to disperse, when it hits that student's account. Now, I want to be clear about this part, though, as to what the disbursement date is. Now, that typically is, as long as you're doing it within the term, it's that disbursement, that date is the date that you applied it against the account. But let's say you're one of these schools that it's 30 days prior to the term beginning, and you know that the student's going to receive this Title IV aid. Maybe it's a second term, and it's just usual business that we're going about here. And you go ahead, maybe even 30 days prior to the term beginning, because it's just easy. You apply those funds, the school funds, because you know you're going to reimburse yourself with Title IV funds, but you apply them using your own school funds well in advance of the term even beginning. Now, by the way, what do we say the earliest is that you can disperse Title IV funds against the student's account? 10 days. I get it. I didn't talk about it yet. You don't have to know it yet. It's called an early disbursement. So when you do that sort of thing and you use your own funds, keep in mind that even though you may have done it 30 days, that's fine. It's your money to do that, and you're going to reimburse yourself later. The reporting of that disbursement has to still be within compliance of our own timelines. Okay? In other words, even though it's 30 days, you have to report it as being 10 days prior to the term beginning. That's all I'm saying there. Okay? As long as it's within guidelines. Otherwise, it's still going to be the date that you used your school funds to apply it against the student's account. So let's be clear about that. All right? Why am I spending so much time talking about that actual disbursement date? Right? Why am I making such a big deal about it? Well, because that actual disbursement date, especially for those direct loans, right, that is the day the interest begins to accrue. And it wouldn't be very cool of you to say, hey, I dispersed it this day, but really I didn't get the money until a week later. Well, tell that to the student who has 7 days worth of interest accruing on their loan. Let them tell you whether or not it's important to them, even though it's only 7 days. So we take it very seriously, and, you know, be sure that if there is an audit, that's one of the things that they're doing. They're looking at your ledgers to see when you actually did it over here, and then they're seeing what you reported to COD. So I want you to be very careful. A lot of schools get hit on this because they're not careful with that. Make sure it's the right actual disbursement date that you have in your system as well as on your ledgers. Okay? Good. Now, yes, we have this notification of disbursements that has to go out to all of your students. Now, just on any other type of Title IV aid, we have this general notification that has to go out where we notify the students of the amount of funds that they're expected to receive from each of the different FSA programs, whether it be Pell, SCOG, direct loans. Always making sure that you provide that notification to them prior to the disbursement occurring. That's important, right? And that you include how and when that disbursement is going to occur. Okay, pretty simple, right? It's a general notification. Then, however, if you have as a part of that award a direct loan, there are just a couple of additional things that you have to include here. You have to include the anticipated date and the amount of the disbursement, as well as a student or parent's right, because we have the Parent Plus loan, right, to cancel all or portion of that loan, or Teach Grant because it can be converted into a loan, okay? And then not just telling them how they can cancel it, right, because we want, the idea is I don't want this debt. I want the opportunity to cancel it. You need to let them know the procedure that they have to go through. In other words, who do they need to talk to? And how do I go ahead and go about getting this canceled or at least reduced? So you have to include all of that as a part of your notification, okay? Good. Then we get to authorizations, right? So when we receive that disbursement, we disperse it against the account. Understand that, and I was just having a conversation with somebody about this earlier because there's always this confusion about tuition and fees. But understand this, that I have to have the students or parents' written permission. I always say parents. Whenever you hear parents, I'm talking about the PLUS loan, okay? But you have to have their permission to do these things, right? And that is, the big one here, the most important one is to use FSA funds to pay for allowable education-related charges other than tuition and fees and room and board, and only that room and board if the student contracts with the school. Now, the big thing I always get about fees is, well, hold on, I've got all these fees over here. The fees that we're talking about are fees that are assessed to every student within that program that the student is currently enrolled in. Any fees outside of that, that does not count as a part of this. Okay, you have to otherwise get their permission, their written permission to use that disbursement against those particular fees. Also, to disperse federal work-study wages by electronic fund transfer, you just have that permission to be able to do that to their designated account, as well as, right, federal work-study funds to be paid to have any of those federal work-study funds be paid against the student's account for any educational-related charges. Because they're working for that, it's a paycheck, it's to help them get by from day to day and buy pizza on Friday nights, right? But if they want to use it for educational-related charges or institutional charges, you can go ahead and get their written permission to do that, okay? Also, to hold an FSA credit balance. Now, I'll talk about this in greater detail a little bit later on, but the idea is that when I disperse funds against someone's account, it is for that payment, is to cover costs for that payment period only, unless you get written permission to go beyond that existing payment period into other payment periods that are existing within the remaining year that the student is enrolled in. I will talk about that more later on. Okay, the other thing is before I make that disbursement, okay, before I make that disbursement, this is something you have to do with all of your students, or that you should be doing, which is ensuring, number one, that your student is still eligible to receive those funds. Okay, sure. What do I mean by eligibility? Well, we have two different types of eligibility determinations. One is, the first one here is the ICER eligibility determination, where we go and we say, listen, yes, the student is a U.S. citizen, or there are no drug-related offenses that we're aware of as a result of completing this. But all those ICER-related eligibility determinations, where we go out to all these other different federal databases and you get a reject or you get a C code, and you need to make sure those are resolved. So the idea is, number one, make sure there's no new pushed ICER out there saying, since you awarded the student right before you did a disbursement, they had a defaulted loan, no big deal. Well, yeah, it's a big deal. You can't disperse, any more Title IV funds to that particular student. So making sure they're still eligible before you make that determination. Then we have the school determination eligibility, such as satisfactory academic progress. Are they actually a regular student? Are they enrolled in an eligible program? Even a bigger one that the ICER doesn't determine, and that is, what is their enrollment status? For goodness sake, right, for Pell, that is what's going to determine, right, is their enrollment status. You just said the add, drops, and withdrawals, and yes, that's based on your Pell recalculation date. But for like direct loans or campus-based aid, when you make the disbursement, that's also when you want to check the enrollment status, right? Are they still enrolled half-time and I'm getting ready to do a direct loan? And if they are, you're fine, okay? So making sure that that's exactly what's going on, that they are at the right enrollment status for the amount that they're receiving or for the aid that they are receiving. Just keep in mind, and I get this a lot from a lot of schools, is both you and your third-party servicer, if you have a third-party servicer, this applies as well, that you have a process in place, to ensure that you are determining the student is still eligible to receive that disbursement before making the disbursement, okay, at the time of the disbursement, all right? Good. All right, so let's continue on. If we're talking about disbursements, we have that 30 delays. I'm going to have to talk about this 30 delay disbursement for these direct loan borrowers. Again, of course, for that first-year borrower, they certainly cannot receive a direct loan disbursement until at least 30 days after the payment period has started. Now, of course, we make that exception for schools who are doing exceptionally well on their cohort default rate. For those who have had a 15%, less than 15% for the 3 most recent fiscal years, then we go ahead and we say you don't have to abide by that. You can go ahead and disperse it to them right away if you so choose. For those of you who have students who are in study abroad programs, we make it a little tougher. It better be below 5%. We need to make sure that you're on top of that. We know that those of you who are 5% or below are really, really cautious, and so we're letting you, for those who are studying abroad, to go ahead and disperse it without waiting 30 days. So, in that case. Then we have this thing called a single payment period disbursement. Now, single payment period disbursement, what I mean by that is I have this thing called, I'm going to set this controller down. I have this thing called a loan period, okay? Now, I am talking about direct loans. That's why I'm talking about loan periods. Now, I have a loan period. Now, typically a loan period is synonymous with my academic year. So let's keep it simple. We'll talk about an academic year as defined as being the fall and spring term. And so my loan period will typically begin at the beginning of the fall term and will end at the end of the spring term. And then my fall term will be a payment period, and then my spring term will be a payment period in and of itself. Well, when is it that I have a loan period that only spans the full length of one payment period, okay? And that might happen as an example where I have a student who doesn't begin attendance until the spring term, but I'm in a traditional school, for instance, and so I begin in the spring term. You may or may not know this, but you can disperse the full annual loan limits, if you so choose, in that spring term alone. But you're going to do that because when you do that, you have a loan period that is going to encompass a single payment period. And you're going to disperse the full annual loan limit, even if you weren't dispersing the full annual loan limit, but you have a loan period that's covering only one payment period, you have this special rule here that I have up here. In other words, when a direct loan is made for one payment period, the loan period is for one payment period, the loan must be dispersed in 2 installments. Okay, and the second installment may not be dispersed until the student has completed half of the payment period. So for that traditional, let's say, spring semester, right, where it's a single payment period, I have to wait until that mid-calendar day point, before I'm allowed to make that second disbursement, okay? That's all we're saying. Now, I've talked a lot about this. We make exception, of course, for those of you who have a fantastic cohort default rate, and you don't have to abide by that. You can make just one disbursement accordingly, not unlike the 30-day delay for the first-time borrowers, okay? Good. All right, disbursements and modules. Let's see your module schools out there. Raise your hand, please, if you don't mind. Yeah, not very high, I know. You don't like it, but you've got to do it anyway, right? So there's some module schools out there. It's the latest rage that our administrators are making us do these days. So we have these modules. So what do I do, Bruce? How do disbursements work in a module environment? Well, when I have a student who's enrolled in a module, and by the way, for those of you, let me back up. There may be some new people in the room. When I say module, that means I have a student who is enrolled in a class that does not span the full length of the term. So I may have a 15-week term, but hold on, I have a class that is only 5 weeks in length, and then what I'll do is I might have a second entirely different class. This is another 5 weeks that follows that class, very intense, and then I have a third class that is entirely different that follows that second one. So I might have 3 different classes that are much shorter than the full length of the term. We call those individual classes modules, and it makes life interesting in the Title IV world. Okay, I'll just say that, if you don't mind. Now, the key to remember is I don't care if I am just enrolled in one of those modules that I just gave as an example. There are other variations. But I'm enrolled in one of those modular classes. Guess what? My loan period still encompasses the entire payment period, even though it's only 5 weeks of the payment period. When I report that loan period to COD in my financial aid system, it is still going to encompass the entire payment period in which it is in, okay? The cost of attendance, this is one that many schools miss, but the cost of attendance needs to exclude, oh, this is fun, the periods of non-attendance. So if I have that student who's enrolled in only Module 1, but not enrolled in Modules 2 and 3, right? Sure, I'm going to have tuition, maybe for whatever the tuition is for the 3 credit hours they're getting in that class, and any fees that are assessed, but guess what? My living expenses should not be included in there, should they? So you don't get to include that. You need to make sure that you exclude those educationally related expenses from your cost of attendance. Bet you didn't know that, but we say that. Disbursements should not, or cannot, I should say, be scheduled during periods of non-attendance. Don't do it. Make sure when you schedule your disbursements that those disbursements are occurring while the student is scheduled to be in attendance, okay? Good. Let's continue on with modules. It doesn't end there. Now, a school can make a single disbursement based on the enrollment. Now, I'm not back to the single, ignore it. This is not loan period in a single disbursement. We're just saying, if I have modules throughout the term, even though my student has begun attendance in the upcoming modules, but they're attending maybe, they're starting off with the first module, but they're enrolled in all 3 modules that might make up, you know, at least half-time or full-time. It doesn't matter. I can go ahead and make a single disbursement based on the student's enrollment status for the entire term up front. I don't have to wait till they begin attendance for those other modules. Okay, the key, though, is for Pell, remember, Pell requires that you begin attendance in all of your classes in order for you to substantiate the enrollment status for which you receive the funds. So guess what? My student must begin attendance. I can go ahead and make that full disbursement at the beginning of the term, hoping that my student shows up for those classes. But if my student does not begin attendance in those other classes, guess what? Well, we earn Title IV-A through attendance, don't we? We learned that through R2T4. And so what I have to do is I have to recalculate the Pell Grant in accordance to what the new enrollment status is because my student never began attendance in those other classes. So that's something to keep in mind. And so I hope you attended the previous session called Add, Drops, and Withdrawals. A great session. If you missed it, that's okay. I'll be back tomorrow. I encourage you to attend. It really goes into greater detail on that. Or if you change enrollment status to less than half-time, right, and it results in the cancellation, that will then result in the cancellation of subsequent loan disbursements. So keep that in mind. What is my student's enrollment status at all time? Make sure that's the key. I'm getting ready to disperse for my direct loan. What is my student's enrollment status? Oh goodness, they just dropped a class last week. They're less than half time. They don't get this disbursement. Okay? So keep that in mind. Now, a school can go ahead and say, and I know a lot of schools, for instance, they say, you know what, I don't want to make that single disbursement at the beginning of the term, especially on that direct loan, or whatever. Okay? We have no problem with you breaking that single disbursement into multiple disbursements within the term as you're, in accordance with your own choosing. You're allowed to do that, okay? So long as you don't exceed. I'm giving a lot of them, hoping nobody's counting the amount that I'm giving. Just better not exceed the total sum that they're eligible for that payment period, okay? Okay, let's talk about early disbursements now that we're done with the high overview kind of stuff. Let's talk about the first type of disbursement, the early disbursement, right? The earliest a school may disburse those Title IV funds. I kind of ruined it for you a little bit. I told you up front. Just kidding. I know you knew this already. So programs with standard terms or you credit hour terms that are substantially equal, referring to direct loans specifically in that case. It doesn't really matter. 10 days before the first day of class of a payment period. That's when I'm allowed to disperse those funds. That's the earliest I'm allowed to disperse those funds. Now, unless I have this standard term, it's a beautiful thing, but I got modules, and my student doesn't really begin class until the beginning of that second module, halfway into the term. Well, guess what the 10 days is? It's 10 days before class start. So 10 days before that second module begins. That's when you're allowed to do it. Don't do it before then, okay? Good. Now, what if I'm a clock hour school or a non-term credit hour or one of these schools that has those non-standard terms that are not substantially equal, okay, in a credit hour environment? Well, we know how that works, right? Because basically, we have to basically take the definition of an academic year, cut it in half, and when they complete half the hours and half the weeks, that's when they get their new disbursement. So what we say with this is, guess what? If your payment periods are back to back, right, especially in your clock hour schools, your student is still completing the prior payment period before the next payment period begins. If they're still completing another payment period, you don't get to disperse the funds. Now, if they complete a payment period and it's more than 10 days prior to the next payment period beginning, well then by all means, please disperse the funds as early as 10 days before the payment period beginning. But in these types of environments, that typically doesn't occur, but it may, okay? So that's all that's saying there is you have up to 10 days so long as you're still not completing another payment period. Well, in that case, you have to wait until the payment period is over, all right, before you're able to make that disbursement. But hold on, I'm making an early disbursement. I made the disbursement on trust that the student was going to begin attendance in that term, and what did the student do? They didn't show up, right? That happens. I heard it happens out there. Well, the student fails to begin attendance completely in the program in which they're enrolled in, or in the classes that they're enrolled in. And so when they fail to begin attendance, guess what happens? If it is Pell, Iraq, Afghanistan Service Grant, TEACH, or SEOG, guess who has to return the money? You do. You have to return the money. That falls on your shoulders to do that. Now, however, if the student fails to begin attendance, in some classes but begins attendance in other classes, guess what you need to do? Well, because they begin attendance in some classes, I'm probably going to have to do a recalculation, right, based on the new enrollment status, for the Pell especially, as well as the TEACH and all the others. Actually, all three of these. I'm going to have to do a recalculation on all of them based on their new enrollment status, okay? And then the student is responsible. Notice this, who then becomes responsible for the difference. Now, if they don't show up at all and you made an early disbursement, well, it's your fault. But if they show up and don't attend all of the classes, well, it's their fault. They're going to have to pay the difference that's owing. But what do schools do? Schools say, well, hold on. No, I'm going to return the money. Okay, I don't know if it's because of the fact that they're used to doing it for not showing up at all, and it's just standard practice, let's just go ahead and we'll return the money, or if it's because of the fact that most schools will go ahead and pay it because of the fact that they don't want to stop the student from continuing on through the term since they did begin. It's just easier for us to pay it back and try to retrieve the funds another way, okay? But either way, just so you know, technically it is a student liability if they attend some but not all of their classes and you made the original disbursement. Most schools go ahead and pay it though, themselves. Then we have, what if the student does not begin attendance for direct loans, right? Handled completely differently. Look at this. The school must return any direct loan funds credited to the student's account. So here I have, the student owes me this money, made an early disbursement, I went ahead and applied against the money they owed me, then maybe I gave them the difference. I dispersed directly to the student the remaining difference after we paid ourselves. Now for direct loan funds, guess what happens? Those funds that we applied against the student's account, we are responsible for returning that portion back. But that portion for which a student, right, got in their own pocket, look at what happens. You must notify the appropriate loan servicer. We can find that easily on NSLDS if you don't know, of the loan funds that are outstanding so that the department, yes, can issue a 30-day demand letter to the student. We'll get it. We'll get the money back. But you're not responsible for that. You're just responsible for notifying the loan servicer. Now that's if the student does not begin attendance at all. What about the student begins attendance? The student, originally we did the early disbursement. They are enrolled at least half-time at the time we did the early disbursement. But guess what? They didn't begin. By the time they actually began attendance, they actually had dropped the class and they're less than half-time. What do I do now? I already gave them the money. Well, what we say is, well, that's okay. At the time you dispersed it, they are enrolled half-time, and so long as they at least began attendance in at least one class, even though they're now less than half-time, we'll let them hold on to that original disbursement. They get to keep that money, right? Because we're nice. They get to keep that money because guess what? We're going to get the money anyway. They're going to pay it back in accordance with the terms and conditions of the master promissory note, so everybody's happy in the end, right? We're happy in the end. Okay, now, but the key is though, remember, now they're less than half-time. If you're one of these schools that breaks it up into 2 disbursements throughout the term, I'll give them a little bit up front, maybe even an early disbursement, but I'm not going to make that second disbursement maybe until halfway through the term. Guess what? You can't make that second disbursement because now they're less than half-time, okay, in that environment. All right? Let's get to the next type of disbursement, the late disbursement. All right, not the early, now the late. Where's the in-between? Anyway, so here we have a late disbursement. What is a late disbursement by definition? Okay, so I did it here. Basically, when I have an otherwise eligible student who becomes ineligible. Well, how do I become ineligible? To receive federal student aid funds on the date the student does, depends on the type of aid as to how we define ineligible. So for direct loans, I became ineligible at the time I was no longer enrolled at least half-time, okay? For grants or Perkins, ignore that. I'm afraid I forgot to take it out for the next slide too, so forgive me. So for grants, any type of FSA grant, is when the student is no longer enrolled at the school for the award year. That is when we're going to do a late disbursement, provided, of course, the student is eligible and certain conditions are met. I'll talk about what those certain conditions are next. What is the conditions in which we can make a late disbursement should a student become ineligible based on those conditions, based on those criteria? Well, number one condition for all late disbursements, all the students have to meet this criteria, which is they have a processed ISER with an official expected family contribution, an EFC, before the student became ineligible. In other words, before the student became less than half-time, okay? That sort of thing. that had to have been in place. Now I want you to notice that we're very careful with the wording we use. Look at that word official EFC. What is an official EFC? Well, an official EFC just means that we have processed and calculated an EFC. It doesn't mean that it's necessarily a correct EFC. That's what we call a valid EFC. Now we're saying that they qualify for a late disbursement, provided we have an ISER with a calculated EFC, okay? At this time, we don't care that it's correct or not correct, just so long as it's calculated, and we'll talk about when we do the actual disbursement later on as to what has to occur at that point. But for now, we're just at the qualifying mode, okay? So I have to have that before they are becoming eligible. Now for direct loans, on top of that, I also had to have originated, right, the direct loan record within my school's financial aid system. Notice how I didn't say I had to have had an accepted origination record from COD, because some of you, I know there are you out there, some of you out there who think that. Well, I have to have an accepted origination record, right? No, we're just saying, what does it say? It says that you have to have an originated record within your own. In other words, you had to have just built it within your financial aid system, and you're golden. You've met that second piece of criteria in order for you to be able to give a late disbursement, okay? For direct loans, yes, go ahead, take pictures. It's a good one. Okay. All right, so then I have there it is, the Perkins. Embarrassing. Ignore it, don't look at it. So we have the SELG, right? Now the SLG, the second condition is that you also just had to have awarded the SELG before, right? Before the student became ineligible, okay? So let's talk about this, right? So the idea is I have this late disbursement. We've met these conditions, Bruce. The key is that we're going to make sure that we're using this for educational purposes only. In other words, they had to have earned these funds still. And then if I'm going to make this late disbursement, make sure I don't disperse it any later than 180 days after the student having become ineligible, okay? Now, if the student is eligible for this late disbursement based on the conditions I was just talking about, guess what? We have to at least attempt, right, to make those late disbursements, to make that late disbursement. Now, saying all of that, you're going to say, hold on, Bruce, what is this? This doesn't make any sense. This is one of those hidden things that you'll find in your FSA handbook, but it is indeed hidden. Most schools miss this. Now check this out. Let's go back and talk about the direct loans for a little bit. Now let's say I have a student, right, who didn't withdraw, right, but they were enrolled at least half-time prior to the disbursement. So here I was. I began the term. I was indeed enrolled at least half-time. And then right before the disbursement, guess what? My student, right, drops to less than half-time. A school may make a late disbursement. Notice the term may. I made it in big letters here. You may make a late disbursement of those direct loan funds. Again, provided the school previously confirmed the student was enrolled at least half-time at the start of the term. There's a caveat here. There's a thing that I want you to notice, that if you're going to do that, I'm ready to make my disbursement. Oh no, now they're enrolled less than half-time, but I know that they began the term as enrolled at least half-time. The caveat is this: if you choose to make that late disbursement, you don't have to. This is where we say you don't have to. To a student who ceases to be enrolled at least half-time, guess what you have to do? The late disbursement itself, the amount itself, cannot exceed the educational costs incurred for the period of instruction during which the student was enrolled at least half-time. In other words, you're going to say, hold on, my student was enrolled. I'm showing that they dropped this class over here, so my student was enrolled at least half-time from this date, only up until this date. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to calculate what the educational expenses were or that were incurred during that period of time, and that is the amount that I'm able to disperse in direct loan funds. Now, by the way, we don't give you a formula for this. You're going to have to figure this out yourself. Okay, but that's what you're going to do, okay, to give you an idea as to how that would work if you're going to do it. Do not give them the full amount. We'll get you on that, all right? Good. All right, so I do have some limitations. A lot of you are already familiar with this, but I'm going to say them anyway, right? So if it is a direct loan and it is the second or subsequent disbursement to the first disbursement, I'm not allowed to make that disbursement. Actually make it, okay? Give it to the student. If it is a late disbursement to a first-time borrower, right, and they didn't attend beyond, for instance, or they withdraw before the 30th day, then guess what? They don't get it either unless you're one of these schools that has a great default rate, then you can go ahead and do it. Or if it's a late disbursement of Title IV funds to a student for whom the school did not have, look at this, this is not qualifying, this is actually giving the money out that I'm talking about. Now that we have a valid ISER. So that, when I say valid, that means that it is a correct ISER, that we see no conflicting information or there's no outstanding verification issues that need to be resolved, okay? So then, unless you have a valid ISER, you cannot disperse those funds, okay? A school cannot make a late disbursement. Yeah, we already talked about this, any later than 180 days. So keep that in mind after the student becomes ineligible. So that was a late disbursement. Now we're going to talk about a post-withdrawal disbursement. Well, post-withdrawal disbursement, what is that? Well, post-withdrawal disbursement is another type of late disbursement. Just when you thought we were done with late disbursements, I keep on going. So I have a different type of late disbursement. It's just handled differently than your usual late disbursement. And a post-withdrawal disbursement basically is a type of late disbursement that results from a student completely withdrawing from their program. It is basically determined through the use of the R2T4 calculation. And the idea is this, is right, here I have a student who begins attendance at your school, and as you all know, or at least most of you, the philosophy behind Title IV aid is that you earn it through attendance. Okay, so my student, as they're going along through that payment period, they're earning it in accordance with the percentage of that payment period they have completed through attendance. Okay? And so what if I have dispersed not all of the funds, but I have dispersed some funds, but the student has earned more than what has been dispersed before they withdraw? Well, when a student earns more money than what has been dispersed, because I haven't dispersed all the funds, well, guess what? I have what's called a post-withdrawal disbursement, which is another type of late disbursement. Okay, you get it? And that's typically determined in step 4 as to whether or not you will have a post-withdrawal disbursement environment in which you find yourself. Now, a post-withdrawal disbursement, how does it vary? Well, number one, right, there's a process involved, and it's all a part of the R2T4 process. Notice my school must provide written notification that they have to the student that they have within 30 days that they have a post-withdrawal disbursement. Notice it's 30 days from the date of determination. In other words, the date that I determined the student had withdrawn, I have 30 days from that point in which I have to notify the student that they have this disbursement that they're eligible to receive still, even though they're no longer in class. Now, if it's grant funds, there's this beautiful thing about grant funds. We don't have to ask for their permission to go ahead and disperse those funds. We just go ahead and we get to go ahead and disperse those funds. Now, if it's a student who's going to receive that money directly, right, because they've already covered institutional costs, well, make sure that if it's going to go directly to the student, they get it within 45 days from the date of determination, the date you determined that they had withdrawn. No more than that, no more than 45 days. Now, if it's money still owed to you, you don't have to ask for the permission either. You get to take that money because they still owe you money for that term. Just disperse it. You just don't have to disperse it within 45 days. You have 180 days to disperse that to yourselves. But why wait? Go ahead and take the money. okay? Now, when we're dealing with post-withdrawal disbursements of loan funds, right, you're going to send that notification, right, within 30 days as well. You're going to provide for them a deadline a reasonable deadline in which they need to respond back to you, right, in that notification as to whether or not they want that direct loan. Because guess what? You cannot disperse that without their confirmation saying that they want those funds. You cannot do that. And so wait until you get their confirmation before you disperse those funds. But if you get their confirmation, that's great. And they get it to you before the deadline you have set, you're obligated to go ahead and make that disbursement. Now, you've set a reasonable deadline for them. If they respond back to you after the deadline that has been set, guess what? It is at your discretion as to whether or not you're going to disperse those funds. You don't have to, and we'll stand by you on that. Okay? However, if you're not going to disperse it, make sure you notify the borrower in writing of the outcome. Okay? Let them know. Don't leave them hanging. But just keep in mind that we don't care how soon, well, other than the fact that you get this disbursement out to the student or to yourself within 180 days, right, from the date of determination. Good. All right, so that was post-withdrawal disbursements. Let's talk about retroactive disbursements. Now, retroactive disbursements, well, that almost sounds like a late disbursement, but it's not at all a late disbursement. Remember, late disbursement had its own rules, didn't it? Now, retroactive disbursements has their own specific rules that are not at all like the late disbursement rules. So let's look at the rules that are specific to the retroactive disbursement. And I'm going to read this word for word because I think it's great, right? I think it's great in explaining as to what a retroactive disbursement is, but let's take a closer look at it. If a school did not make a disbursement to an enrolled student, so number one, that's my number one thing. In order for me to make a retroactive disbursement for a payment period completed, my student has to be enrolled right now. So they completed the fall term. I better not make a retroactive disbursement if my student is not currently enrolled in the spring term. Number one, the school may pay the student for all payment periods in the current award year for all Title IV-8 except for loans, or loan periods for those loans, right, for which the student is eligible. So long as, I don't care if it's in the summer, right, and I'm in the same award year, but I didn't pay them for the fall or even the spring, I can make those retroactive disbursements. But I have to be in the current award year as that other condition for me to make that retroactive disbursement for those payment periods that have passed. But you're saying, what has happened here, Bruce, that a whole payment period has gone by and I haven't given them the money? Well, it's probably your fault. No, it's not. Sometimes it's just the student didn't complete their FAFSA, right? Maybe I attended the fall and you said, hey, there's this thing called a FAFSA. Probably should have filled it out. I'm sorry I didn't tell you. It's the spring now. Could you go ahead and fill that out? Maybe we can get you some money for the fall term that has gone by that you attended. Okay. So they complete the FAFSA and you get an ICER and so on and so forth. That might be a time where I can go ahead and make a retroactive disbursement, right? Maybe they did have a FAFSA. Maybe there was some resolution that needed to be resolved. Maybe it was just a really bad verification thing that was going on and it just took more, went beyond the payment period. I can make a retroactive disbursement. Usually it's these administrative things that are going on, okay, that will cause it to where it's not having been dispersed. But keep in mind, my student better be currently enrolled before I can make that retroactive disbursement, okay? Because guess what? If they're completing the FAFSA in the spring, but they're not enrolled, do I get to make that late disbursement? No, remember that first condition for a late disbursement? I better have an official ICER with an official EFC. See how this is really cool? Well, they were ineligible. They're no longer enrolled. They didn't have an official EFC, but look, maybe I can they're still enrolled now. Maybe I can go ahead and make a retroactive disbursement, you see? Now, retroactive disbursements are a little bit different, okay? Retroactive disbursements say, guess what? If I'm going to pay for a payment period that has already passed, what I have to do is I have to take a look at the number of credit hours the student had actually completed. Not what they began in, not in accordance with your Pell recalculation date, okay? It's what credit hours did they actually complete. Now, I do want to be careful with this and say that is not just those credit hours that are just being necessarily applied towards the completion of their program, but also maybe the student attended the entire term for a particular class. They were just a bad student, okay, and they got F. They got an F or maybe another F. So long as they completed it and they attended it, what did I say? They earned it, didn't they? So even those classes in which they got an F, but they attended all the way through the term, you get to count those credit hours as well. But you certainly don't get to count the hours in which the student dropped those classes, okay, for instance. Okay? Same thing, direct loans. I'm going to count those hours that are completed, including those hours that were F courses that they actually attended all the way through. I just need to make sure that they completed at least enough credit hours to be at least half time. Okay? Good. So, and then I can go ahead. I can make that disbursement based off those hours. That's how I determine my enrollment status. All right, so that's retroactive disbursements. Now, let's talk about these things called Title IV credit balances. Don't look at that screen. Title IV credit balance, okay? Now, I like to say this, here's the verbiage, and you're going to get lost just like everybody else when I read it. So let's not read it. You can read it on your own time. The reason why I'm not reading it is because it's easier with pictures, okay? What do I mean by a Title IV credit balance? Well, essentially what we're saying is, right, in this example, I have my institutional charges, the money that I'm going to take as soon as that money comes in, that's mine, okay, that tuition fee, those tuition fees to which I'm entitled to get paid first, okay? Now here I have, in this example, institutional charges in the amount of $3,000. Well, my student received aid in the amount of $6,172 there. Notice that? But of that aid that they received in the amount of $6,172, I want you to notice how much of that aid is Title IV aid. Notice the term Title IV credit balance. Now, of that aid, it is actually only $5,172. So I don't want you to get confused. You say, well, hold on, 6,172 minus 3,000, they have a Title IV credit balance. No, they don't. They have a credit balance, right, of 3,172, but they don't have a Title IV credit balance of 3,172. They only have a Title IV credit balance because they have 5,172 in Title IV aid. Therefore, have a Title IV credit balance of 2,000 only 172. And so why does that matter? Well, we're not going to tell you when you have to get that extra $1,000 in scholarship money. That's none of our business, okay? As to when you get that to them, we don't care. Well, we care because we love our students, right? But you get to make that determination. You don't have to go by these rules I'm going to share with you a little bit later on. All we care about is that 2,172, not that extra 1,000 of scholarship money. You can determine when you're going to give that to the student. Most schools just do it at the same time, okay? Now, understand this, right? You're going to have to pay that credit balance, that Title IV credit balance, to the student or parent if it's a PLUS loan, no later than, notice, 14 days after the balance occurs, if it occurs after the first day. Now, if it's an early disbursement, meaning that it occurred prior to, maybe 10 days prior to the term beginning, guess what? You get a little extra time, not until 14 days after the first day of classes do you have to disperse it. So you get 24 days, kind of, if you think about it. See, we're being nice. Maybe. All right, so then, right, what do we consider paid on date? We got 14 calendar days to deal it within, right? Well, so long as you mail that check within 14 days, that's considered paid. That's a nice one. Or guess what? You don't have to mail that check. Just send out a notification. So long as you send out a notification to the student within the 14-day time frame, Notice that the funds are available for immediate pickup. Don't be one of these schools that sends out a notification. A school student shows up, I heard money's there for me, and you say, well, not really. Come back in another week, maybe we'll have it ready for you. Yeah, you're in trouble when you do that, okay? Don't do that. Don't do that. So when you're sending out that notification, make sure when you're sending it out within those 14 days that the money is ready for immediate pickup, okay? Now, if they don't show up to pick it up because you've done the notification, you can hold it for up to 21 days from that point, okay? Now, if they don't pick it up within 21 days, guess what? Then you can go ahead and mail that check or do an electronic fund transfer, okay? You can do one of those two things, or we'll take it back. Go ahead and send it back to us. We don't mind. Send it back to the department, okay? You can do that too, all right? Now, technically, yes, if you have the student's or parent's authorization to hold that credit balance, you're allowed to do that if you have their authorization to do it. Just make sure that if you're going to do this and you have their authorization, that you maintain a subsidiary ledger for credit balances, identifying the amounts for each student, okay, or parent as to what the credit balance is. And maintain cash equal to the credit balances held. Now, what does that mean? I'm maintaining cash. Does that mean I changed my mind, give me my money now? Well, no. Okay, that means they might show up and say, I want to cancel it right now. Guess what? You do have 14 calendar days from the time that they cancel it to get that amount to them, okay? We just want you to still maintain that cash and make it available to maintain that cash in the account, okay? Guess what? You get to keep that interest that earns. Great interest rate these days. Anyway, just kidding. Get to keep the interest if you want. All right, so my school must release any remaining credit balance regardless if I have an authorization, right? That authorization is only good if it's direct loan funds that are part of the Title, that are the Title IV credit balance. I don't get to hold, I don't have authorization to hold those funds beyond the end of the loan period. You see? So I might in the fall receive this authorization, that's great. I don't have to make sure that money is back in their hands by the end of the payment period. I get to hold it through into the spring and use that to help pay for spring expenses. That sort of thing. That's usually when they do it. But guess what? For loans, you better not be holding it beyond the end of that loan period. Okay, you need to make sure that they get that money back to them. Okay, now if it's any other type of aid besides a loan, then you need to make sure that you get that money to them because you don't get to hold on to that beyond the award year. All right, the end of the last payment period of the award year. So if it's a summer, it's a crossover payment period, it's a trailer by the end of that summer term, you better make sure they have that money in their hands, okay? Even with an authorization, even if they beg you, please keep it, you can't. All right. Now, what about regaining eligibility? Now, this is a hard one to find in your handbook, and I thought it was important to put it on there. When can I make a disbursement for a student who had lost eligibility for some particular reason, right, but is now has regained eligibility? How can I disperse those funds? For which type of program? Well, generally, the general rule where you're going to be safe 90% of the time, you might want to write this one down because, again, I'm telling you, it's hard to find. Generally, when a student regains eligibility, a school can award the federal Pell Grant, teach, and any kind of campus-based aid, starting with the current payment period forward. Okay? In other words, not allowed to make a retroactive disbursements, all right, for these types of funds for a prior payment period within the award year, generally. And then for loans, for the period of enrollment. What do I mean by that? Well, guess what? It's the spring, but the period of enrollment, the student was enrolled in the fall, I will let you go back and make a retroactive disbursement. Remember we learned what a retroactive disbursement was, right? You're fully informed now. I can go back and make a retroactive disbursement for my student for that direct loan if they are enrolled for the fall term, okay, as well. Now, let's take a look at the different types of situations where I may have lost eligibility and I've just regained it. I had a defaulted student or a student who had an overpayment and they've just regained eligibility. Let's pretend it's the spring term and this is when it occurred. For my Pell, teach campus-based, yes, it's the general rule for default or overpayments, only beginning with this current payment period. I don't care if you're enrolled in the fall. Beginning with this payment period, do I get the money? For direct loans, a little bit different. I can go ahead and give you a retroactive disbursement. You get it? Let's say it's a drug conviction. Oh no. And I just regained eligibility in the spring term. Starting with this spring term, do I get eligibility? All right, with direct loans, I can go back a term. Let's switch it up a little bit. This is the exception to the rule. Satisfactory academic progress. Well, I just became eligible. I wasn't last term eligible because I wasn't making satisfactory academic progress. Well, guess what? Starting with this term for both the Pell and the direct loan, do I get funds? I do not get to make a retroactive disbursement for the fall term. Okay? That's the exception on one exception. Here's the other exception. I just regained eligibility. Well, citizenship, there are some citizenship status issues, some selective service, some valid social security number issues that are finally resolved. That's really not regaining eligibility, but we put it up here anyway. Now, if I did that in the spring, and I resolved all that, guess what I'm eligible for a retroactive disbursement in the fall term? That's right, Pell, teach, campus-based, I get it all, as well as the direct loan. Okay. So this is gold, folks. I'm telling you, you're not going to find this anywhere else. It's hard to find, so print it. Okay, yes, we love getting that money and giving it, but what happens when we give them too much and that sort of thing, and we have to return it back? That's never fun. But we do have to sometimes return that money, don't we? So what do I do when I have to return funds? Well, the department says you've returned those funds, or we consider it to have been returned, when you have deposited or transferred those funds. This is one way, into your federal funds account. Oh, that's all good. I'm just going to go ahead and deposit it into my federal funds account. Well, guess what happens once I deposit it into my federal funds account? Does it get to sit there for fun? No. If I'm going to do that route, I better make sure that I have somebody to redisperse those funds to within the next 3 business days. Otherwise, it becomes excess cash, doesn't it? We learned that earlier, didn't we? So that's one thing that you can do, is you can go ahead and deposit your federal funds and give it to somebody else, okay? Make sure that if it's a direct loan that you're returning, that you're giving it to somebody who needs a direct loan, saying, oh, no, this is Pell Grant money. Yeah, you can't do that. So you get the idea, right? Now, the other way, which is probably more likely what's going to occur, is you're going to initiate an electronic funds transfer back of those funds back to the department in the appropriate program for which it was intended, okay? Now, when you return money, make sure that when you do return that money, that you're going to go back into COD, you're going to go back into your financial aid system. Whichever it is, it's going to make that adjustment into COD and make that downward adjustment so the amount, the net amount they have in the G5 system is going to match your net amount in your own financial aid system as well as what's in COD. Right? That's called reconciliation. Make sure that all matches in the end. Okay, now, something to keep in mind, when I'm returning direct loan funds, sometimes you get a student who comes up to you and says, you know what, this is just too much money. I don't know what to do with all this money, right? So could you go ahead and return some of it back? I know there's different reasons, I'm joking. But they want you to return some of it back. Well, that's all fine and dandy, so long as it is within 120 days from from when the disbursement was made. If they make that request, you can go ahead, if you want to, take that money and then go ahead and return it through the G5 system. And guess what happens? That amount they return back, they back off that total sum as though they never borrowed that portion at all, and they adjust for any interest that may have accrued, any fees that they assess because the amount as though it never happened, as long as it's done within 120 days. That's why we want you to do it through the G5 system. Now, when they go beyond 120 days, you're going to say, hold on, I don't do that. This is a payment, my friends, because I cannot back off that fee, and that interest is going to accrue no matter what after those 120 days. So then it's a payment, and that's why you're going to encourage them, not encourage them, but hey, if you really want this to go back, you're going to have to contact the student loan servicer and make arrangements for payment, okay? So there will be interest and some fees that will have accrued as a result of that. Now, on the other hand, if it's not as a result of a student request, they're going to, it's just basically because they have more money than they should have received in the first place. It's a regulatory issue. Oops, I need to get this money back. Let's get it back, and I've got it. That's when I don't care if it's been more than 120 days or not. I'm going to use the G5 system to do that, okay? Good. Now, when we have overpayments, I'm sorry, I actually created an entire overpayment session. This just doesn't do it justice. This is a very high overview. Obviously, overpayments are more complex than this, but I will just say that just a reminder here that, yeah, if we have an overpayment environment in which the student received more than which they are entitled, right, we have to determine whether or not it was as a result of administrative error on the school's part or as a result of the student not, giving you all the correct information they should have, and that's why they got all the money. Now, if it's the school's fault, then you obviously have to return the overpayment difference. If it's the student's fault, then obviously anything that is $25 or more, the student has to repay that difference and return the money. Keep in mind, if it's a school error, typically it's as a result of, unresolved over-awards. We knew they were over-awarded. We couldn't adjust any future disbursements and so on and so forth any more than what they were and so on and so forth. But you can see these examples there as a result of typically some sort of administrative error that was on the school's part, and yeah, you got to take the hit. You got to go ahead and return that money, okay? Then if we're correcting the federal Pell Grant overpayment, right, because it's a Pell Grant overpayment, how do we adjust for that? Well, the cool thing is I don't have to return the money if there are still some future disbursements remaining within the award year for the student and they're going to be in attendance. If that's the case, guess what? I get to go ahead and make a downward adjustment so the student receives the correct amount for the right amount for the full award year for the next disbursement, and nobody gets hurt other than the student receiving less money in the next payment period, okay? Otherwise, you're going to pay the difference, like I said earlier, or the student's going to pay the difference for which they owe on that. Direct loans a little bit different. We still go ahead and make adjustments to future disbursements, right? Make a downward adjustment so they don't receive quite as much, so that they get the right amount. But also, guess what? If it's already fully dispersed, we already know we're going to get the money. They get to keep it, okay, and pay it back in accordance with the terms and conditions of the loan, okay? So it's nothing to worry about. You don't get hit on that. The student doesn't get hit on that other than having to pay it back a larger sum when it's time to pay it back, okay? Just keep in mind the school must notify the student in writing if there is an overpayment amount, letting them know you have an overpayment, right? And the failure to repay could result in you losing Title IV eligibility. Now, students will oftentimes come back and say, hold on here, that's not my fault, that's your fault. All we ask that you do here is that you take a look at things from their perspective, please. Consider their claim as to why they believe it's your fault. All right? Now, I have provided resources here for you for disbursements. I've even labeled them for you, okay, where you can find specific things. And then I went into the Code of Federal Regulations and labeled and told you exactly where you have the authority under the current regulations, of which I speak today on all these issues. If you have any questions, you can come look for me at the Ask a Fed desk, or at your own convenience, send an email to askafed@ed.gov. That's our new email address that we've created that goes to all the training officers around the country, and they'll have fun in responding back to you, okay? Otherwise, I'll be up here. It looks like everybody's leaving. Our time is actually about up. But I'll be up here to take any questions if you want to ask me some. If you miss me, don't forget, I'm always at the Ask a Fed desk when I'm not presenting. Thank you very much.